What if you were just 11 years old, and the people who were supposed to protect you? My name is Sydney Mitchell, and at 11 years old, I learned something no child should ever have to learn, that survival can feel like a full-time job when you're completely alone. It started on an ordinary summer day, the kind where nothing feels like it's about to change your life forever. My parents stood in the kitchen, casually talking about their upcoming trip to Europe as if they were discussing groceries. Paris, Rome, Santorini, the words sounded beautiful, distant, unreal. But what felt even more unreal was what came next. They placed two $10 bills on the table in front of me, along with a credit card they said was for emergencies. Their voices were calm, almost rehearsed, as if this was completely normal. "You're old enough," my mom said, barely looking at me. "You can take care of yourself." I remember standing there frozen, trying to understand how a child could suddenly be expected to live like an adult. I asked questions, simple ones, like who would stay with me, or if grandma could come. But every question was dismissed like an inconvenience. My dad didn't even turn around. He just stood there silently, like this decision had already been made long before I was told. And just like that, it was over. They picked up their suitcases, walked out the door, and left me standing in a house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too empty. At that moment, I didn't yet understand what had truly happened. I didn't know the card they gave me didn't work. I didn't know that $20 would have to last 30 days. And I definitely didn't know that by the time they returned, everything about our lives would be exposed in the most public and devastating way possible. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All I felt was confusion, and a quiet fear I didn't have words for. The kind of fear that creeps in, slowly whispering that something is very, very wrong. I stood at the door, long after they left, hoping, almost expecting that they would come back and tell me it was all a joke, that no parent would actually leave their child alone like this. But the street stayed empty. The silence grew louder. And that was the moment my childhood ended, without warning, without explanation, and without anyone there to catch me as I fell. If you had driven past our house, you would have thought we were the kind of family people envied. The lawn was always perfectly trimmed, not a blade of grass out of place. The paint on the walls was fresh, the windows spotless, and two cars sat neatly in the driveway, like a picture from a real estate brochure. Inside, everything matched: furniture, arranged just right, decorations carefully chosen, every corner curated to reflect a life that seemed stable, successful, and happy. But what people didn't see was what was missing. They didn't see me. My mother loved appearances. She had built an entire identity around them. Every week she posted photos online, smiling family dinners, holiday decorations, weekend trips. Her captions were always the same tone: grateful, blessed, living the dream. Thousands of people liked those posts. They commented about how lucky she was, how beautiful her life looked. And in every photo she was glowing. My father was present. The house looked perfect. But if you paid attention, something felt off. I was rarely in those pictures. When I was, I stood slightly behind, slightly out of focus, like an afterthought. It wasn't that I was hidden on purpose. It was worse than that. I simply didn't matter enough to be included fully. My father was there physically, but not really there. He worked long hours and came home every evening at the same time. He would sit down, eat dinner quietly, watch the news, and then go to bed. Conversations didn't really involve him. Decisions didn't come from him. He existed in the background of our lives, just like I did, except no one questioned his absence. When my mother spoke, he nodded. When she decided something, he agreed. It was easier that way. And slowly, I learned that my voice worked the same way by not using it. I became the quiet one. That was the label she gave me, and it stuck. Whenever guests came over, she would smile and say, "Sydney is so independent. She doesn't need much attention." People would laugh like it was a compliment. I would nod, because that was what was expected. But independence at 11 didn't feel like strength. It felt like being forgotten. I learned to make my own breakfast when I was 8, not because anyone taught me, but because no one else would. I packed my own school bag, signed my own permission slips when my mother forgot, and walked to school alone every day. At first, I thought this was normal. I thought all kids learned to take care of themselves this early. I thought love meant not being a burden. So I tried to be as invisible as possible. I kept my room clean, Stayed quiet, never complained. Because every time I did ask for something, even something small, my mother would sigh. Not loudly, not angrily, but just enough to make me feel like I had ruined something important. That sigh taught me more than words ever could. It told me that my needs were inconvenient, that asking for attention was selfish, that being seen came at a cost. So I stopped asking. And when you stop asking long enough, people stop noticing you altogether. That was the reality behind the perfect photos. Behind every smiling post was a house where silence filled the spaces that love should have occupied, where being easy was valued more than being cared for, where a child could slowly fade into the background and no one would stop to ask where she had gone. I didn't feel abused. I didn't feel neglected in the obvious ways people talk about. There were no bruises, no shouting, no dramatic fights. There was just absence. A quiet, constant absence that wrapped around everything. And the hardest part about that kind of emptiness is that it doesn't look wrong from the outside. It looks like peace. It looks like success. It looks like a family that has everything. But inside, I was learning a different truth. That you can live in a beautiful house and still feel completely alone. That you can sit at the same table as your parents and still feel invisible. And that sometimes the most dangerous kind of neglect isn't loud or obvious. It's the kind that teaches you that you don't matter without ever saying it out loud. 2 weeks before my parents left, my mother called me downstairs, like it was any other ordinary moment. I remember the sound of her voice light, almost casual, as if she were about to ask me what I wanted for dinner. But when I walked into the living room, something felt different. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. On it, I could see a travel booking page, flights, destinations, dates. My father stood near the window, his back to us, staring outside like he always did when he didn't want to be part of a conversation. "Sydney," my mom said, not even looking up right away, "your father and I need a break." Her tone was calm, rehearsed like she had practiced saying those words. "We're going to Europe for a month." She said it like it was a reward, like I should be happy for them. Paris, Rome, Greece. The names floated in the air, beautiful but distant, like something from a movie that had nothing to do with me. I stood there trying to process what she was saying. A month. 30 days. My mind couldn't even hold that number properly. It felt too big. "Who will I stay with?" I asked, because that was the only question that made sense to me. My mother finally looked at me then, her expression flat, almost impatient. "You'll stay here," she said simply. I blinked, thinking I had misunderstood. "Here? With who?" "By yourself," she replied, as if it were obvious. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved in closer. But a whole month, my voice came out quieter than I expected. I wasn't trying to argue, I was trying to understand. My mother sighed, a short, sharp sound that immediately made my chest tighten. "Sydney, don't be dramatic. You're 11. You know how to take care of yourself. I've taught you everything you need." I looked at my father then, hoping, needing him to say something, to step in, to correct this, to laugh and say it was a joke. But he didn't turn around. He didn't move. He just stood there staring out the window like nothing was happening. That silence said more than words ever could. It told me he wasn't going to help, that this decision had already been made, and my feelings didn't matter. "Can Grandma stay?" I tried again, my voice smaller now. "Or Aunt Ruth?" The moment I said her name, something in my mother's expression hardened. "Grandma is busy," she cut in quickly. "And Ruth?" She paused, lips pressing together. "You know I don't speak to her." I didn't know why she didn't speak to Aunt Ruth. I only knew it had been that way for years. And just like that, every option I could think of was gone. My mother closed her laptop and stood up, signaling that the conversation was over, even though I still had so many questions I didn't know how to ask. She walked to her purse, pulled out 2 $10 bills and a credit card, and placed them on the table in front of me. The sound they made hitting the surface felt louder than it should have. "This is for you," she said. $20 for snacks, and the card is for emergencies. I stared at the money, then at the card, then back at her. "What kind of emergencies?" I asked quietly. She looked at me, then really looked, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "Only use it if the house is on fire," she said, her voice cold now. Do you understand? I nodded even though I didn't. Not really, because how could a child understand what counted as an emergency when being left alone for a month already felt like one good? She said already, turning away. Already done with me. We leave Monday morning. We'll be back in exactly 1 month. Exactly 1 month. She said it like it was nothing. Like time wouldn't stretch and bend when you were alone. Like 30 days wouldn't feel like forever. I picked up the money and the card, my fingers trembling slightly, and walked upstairs without saying anything else. I remember sitting on my bed, staring at what she had given me, trying to make it make sense. $20, 1 card, 1 month. I tried to imagine what each day would look like, but my mind kept going blank. It was too much, too unfamiliar. But the strangest part wasn't the fear, it was the doubt. A small voice in my head kept whispering that maybe this was normal. That maybe other kids did this too. That maybe I was just being dramatic, like my mother said. Because when you grow up being told your feelings are too much, you start to question them. You start to believe that maybe the problem isn't what's happening, it's you. And so I sat there holding the money and the card, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that I could handle it, that I was strong enough. But deep down beneath all that doubt, there was another feeling, quieter, harder to ignore. Something was wrong, really wrong, and I just didn't have the words yet to say it out loud. 2 weeks before my parents left, my mother called me downstairs like it was just another ordinary moment. I remember the sound of her voice. Light, almost casual, as if she were about to ask me something simple. Something safe. But when I walked into the living room, something felt different in a way. I couldn't explain. She was sitting on the couch with her laptop, open the screen glowing in the dim light, and on it I could see a booking page filled with flights, destinations, and dates. My father stood near the window, his back turned toward us, staring outside like he always did when he didn't want to be involved. "Sydney," my mom said finally, glancing at me, "your father and I need a break." Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed, like she had already said this 100 times in her head. "We're going to Europe for a month. Paris, Rome, Greece." The words sounded beautiful, like something out of a dream, but they didn't feel like they belonged to me. They felt distant, like I was hearing someone else's story. I stood there trying to understand what she meant, trying to hold onto the idea of a month, but it slipped through my mind, like something too big to grasp. "Who will I stay with?" I asked quietly, because that was the only question that made sense. My mother didn't hesitate. "You'll stay here," she said. I blinked, confused. "Here? With who? By yourself?" she replied, as if there was nothing strange about it. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too still, like everything had stopped moving. "But a whole month." My voice sounded smaller, now uncertain. My mother let out a short sigh, the kind that always made me feel like I had done something wrong. "Sydney, don't be dramatic. You're 11. You know how to take care of yourself. I've taught you everything." I looked at my father, hoping he would turn around, hoping he would say something, anything, that would make this feel less real. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring out the window like the conversation didn't exist. That silence felt heavier than any words could have been. It told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't going to help. "Can Grandma come stay?" I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Or Aunt Ruth?" The moment I said her name, my mother's expression hardened. "Grandma is busy," she said quickly. "And Ruth?" She paused, her lips tightening. "You know I don't speak to her." I didn't understand why. I only knew that meant no. Every door I tried to open closed immediately. My mother shut her laptop and stood up like the conversation was finished, even though I still had so many questions trapped inside me. She walked to her purse, pulled out 2 $10 bills and a credit card, and placed them on the table in front of me. The sound echoed louder than it should have. "This is for you," she said. $20 for snacks, and this card is for emergencies." I stared at the money, then at the card, then back at her. "What kind of emergencies?" I asked. She looked at me directly now, her eyes cold. "Only use it if the house is on fire," she said. "Do you understand?" I nodded, even though I didn't. Because how could I understand what counted as an emergency when this already felt like one? "Good," she said, already, turning away. "We leave Monday morning. We'll be back in exactly 1 month. Exactly 1 month." She said it like time would pass, normally like it wouldn't stretch and twist when you were alone. I picked up the money and the card, my fingers trembling slightly, and walked upstairs without saying anything else. I sat on my bed staring at what she had given me, trying to make sense of it. $20. One card, 1 month. I tried to break it down to imagine how each day would work, but my thoughts kept collapsing into confusion. The fear was there, but something else was stronger, the doubt. A quiet voice in my head kept repeating my mother's words. Don't be dramatic. You know how to take care of yourself. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was normal. Maybe I was the problem for feeling scared. Because when you grow up being told your feelings are too much, you start to question them. You start to shrink them, silence them, until you're no longer sure what's real. So I sat there holding the money and the card, trying to convince myself that everything would be okay, that I was strong enough, that I could handle it. But deep down beneath all that doubt, there was another feeling, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. Something was wrong, not just a little wrong, completely wrong. And even though I didn't have the words yet to explain it, I could feel it settling into my chest, heavy and undeniable, like a truth waiting for the moment I would finally be brave enough to say it out loud. The morning my parents left didn't feel real at first. It felt like something temporary, something that would be undone the moment they changed their minds and came back through the door. My mother wore a light floral dress, her hair styled perfectly like she was already stepping into her vacation life. My father carried the suitcases without saying much, loading them into the car waiting outside. Everything moved quickly, smoothly, like a routine they had already rehearsed in their heads. Remember to lock the doors, my mom said as she stepped out, not turning around to look at me. Don't bother anyone. That was it. No hug, no pause, no hesitation, just instructions. I stood in the doorway as they got into the car, watching the engine start, watching the vehicle pull away from the curb. I remember thinking they might stop, that maybe they would realize something was wrong and come back. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the empty street, waiting for a second chance that never came. When I finally closed the door, the sound echoed through the house in a way it never had before. It wasn't just a door closing. It felt like something ending. That first evening, the silence settled in slowly, like a weight pressing down on everything. Without the usual background noise of adults moving around, talking, existing, the house felt too still. I could hear things I had never noticed before: the low hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint sound of wind brushing against the windows. Every small noise felt louder, sharper, like it was trying to remind me that I was alone. I walked from room to room without purpose, turning on lights, even though it wasn't dark yet, just to make the space feel less empty. The living room looked the same, the furniture untouched, the decorations perfectly arranged. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. It was as if the house was no longer a home, just a place I was temporarily surviving in. When night came, it came too fast. Darkness filled the corners of every room, stretching into spaces that felt deeper than they should have. I locked the doors like my mother told me, checked them more than once, then stood there for a moment listening. There was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I went to my room and got into bed, pulling the blanket over me, even though it wasn't cold. It felt like protection, like something I could hide inside. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to come, but it didn't. My mind wouldn't stop moving. Every sound made me flinch: the creak of the floor, the distant noise outside. Even my own breathing sometimes felt too loud. I kept thinking about what my mother had said. You're old enough. You can take care of yourself. I repeated those words in my head, trying to make them feel true, trying to believe that I wasn't supposed to be scared. But fear doesn't disappear just because you tell it to. It grows in the silence, fills the spaces where comfort should be. Hours passed slowly. I watched the numbers on my clock change, each minute stretching longer than the last. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, only that it didn't feel like rest. It felt like my body giving up. The next morning I woke up to the same silence. For a moment, I forgot. I expected to hear movement in the house, voices, something normal, but there was nothing. And then it came back to me all at once. They were gone. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, my steps slow, uncertain. Opening the refrigerator felt like opening a question I wasn't ready to answer. Inside there was almost nothing. A half carton of milk, a few eggs, a loaf of bread that didn't look fresh anymore. No real food, nothing that could last. I stood there for a long time, staring at what was missing more than what was there. Then I remembered the money. $20. That was everything I had. I placed it on the table and looked at it like it might change if I stared long enough. I tried to divide it in my head, tried to imagine how far it could stretch, but no matter how I calculated it, the answer was the same. It wasn't enough. Not for a month. Not even close. And that was the moment it truly sank in. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a misunderstanding. I wasn't waiting for someone to come back and fix it. I was alone. Completely. Undeniably alone. And for the first time, the fear stopped whispering. It spoke clearly. I didn't know if I could do this. The second morning felt different from the first. The shock of being alone hadn't disappeared, but it had settled into something heavier, something more real. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a situation I had to survive. I walked into the kitchen slowly, almost hesitating, before opening the refrigerator, like I already knew what I would find, but didn't want to face it. When I finally pulled the door open, the cold air hit my face, and for a moment I just stood there staring. Inside, there was almost nothing. A half carton of milk, a few eggs, a loaf of bread that was already going stale, and some jars of sauce that couldn't be turned into a real meal. No fruit, no vegetables, no meat, nothing that could last. I closed the door, then opened it again, as if something might magically appear the second time. It didn't. The emptiness stayed the same, quiet and undeniable. I turned around and sat at the kitchen table, placing the money my parents had left in front of me. 2 $10 bills. That was everything. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make it stretch in my mind. I tried to divide it across the days, imagining how much I could spend each day if I wanted it to last for a month. The number didn't make sense. It came out to less than $1 a day. Less than a single cheap meal. I felt something tighten in my chest as the reality settled in. Maybe I could eat less, I thought. Maybe if I skipped meals or made the food last longer somehow. I picked up the bread and squeezed it lightly. It was already starting to harden. I put it back down carefully, like I was afraid it might disappear if I handled it too roughly. Then I remembered the card, the emergency card. Maybe that was the real solution. Maybe my parents had thought of everything, and this was just a test I didn't understand yet. I took the card from my pocket and sat down at the table with the old tablet my mom had given me. I searched for a food delivery app and found a simple meal I thought I could afford. My hands trembled slightly as I typed in the card number, the expiration date, everything exactly as it appeared. I pressed confirm and waited. For a second, nothing happened. Then the message appeared. Transaction declined. I blinked, confused. Maybe I typed something wrong. I checked the numbers again more carefully this time, making sure every digit was correct. I tried again. Declined. The word felt heavier the second time, like it was confirming something I didn't want to believe. I swallowed and picked up the card, turning it over in my hands. There was a phone number on the back. I dialed it, listening to the automated voice guide me through options I barely understood. When it finally checked the card, the answer came quickly and without emotion. This card is not activated. Please contact your bank for assistance. I sat there in silence, the phone still in my hand, the words echoing in my head. Not activated. That meant it had never worked. Not for a moment. Not for emergencies. Not for anything. It was useless. I placed the phone down slowly, my fingers numb. The room felt colder now, even though nothing had changed. I looked back at the money on the table. $20. That was it. No backup. No safety net. My parents were thousands of miles away, eating in restaurants I couldn't even imagine, while I sat in a quiet kitchen trying to figure out how to survive on less than $1 a day. I felt the panic rise sharp and sudden, but I pushed it down. Panic wouldn't help. I needed a plan. I stood up and walked to the cabinet, opening it slowly, checking every shelf. There were a few random items, some old pasta, a nearly empty jar of peanut butter, things that didn't come together into real meals. I closed the cabinet and leaned against it for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to steady myself. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the money again, holding it tightly in my hand like it was something more than it was. I told myself I could make it work. I had to. There was no one else coming, no one checking on me, no one fixing this. I was on my own. And for the first time, I started to understand what that really meant. Survival wasn't just about being alone. It was about making impossible choices every single day: how much to eat, what to save, how long I could go without. And as I stood there, in that quiet kitchen, holding $20 that suddenly felt smaller than ever, I realized something that scared me more than anything else. This wasn't just going to be hard. It might be impossible. By the third day, hunger was no longer just a feeling. It had become a constant presence, something that stayed with me no matter what I tried to do. It wasn't sharp or dramatic at first. It was slow, persistent, like a voice that kept reminding me that I didn't have enough. I woke up that morning already tired, even though I hadn't done anything. My body felt heavier, slower, like it was trying to conserve energy without asking me. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while before standing up, trying to ignore the emptiness in my stomach. But ignoring it didn't make it go away. It only made it louder. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I needed food. Real food, not just whatever was left in the house. I picked up the money again, those same two $10 bills, and put them carefully in my pocket. That was all I had, and I couldn't afford to make a mistake. The walk to the grocery store felt longer than usual, even though it was just down the street. Every step felt heavier, like I was carrying something invisible with me. When I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the smell of food hit me immediately: fresh, bread-cooked meals, things I hadn't realized I missed until that moment. My stomach tightened painfully, and I had to remind myself why I was there. I couldn't just grab what I wanted. I had to think. I walked slowly through the aisles, looking at prices more than the food itself. Every number mattered. Every cent felt like it could decide whether I would eat later in the week or not. I stopped in front of a shelf filled with instant noodles. They were cheap, less than $1 per pack. I picked one up then, another counting in my head. If I bought several, I could stretch them across multiple days. It wouldn't be enough, but it would be something. I placed them in my basket along with the cheapest loaf of bread I could find, and a small jar of peanut butter. I stood there for a moment, debating if I should put something back, but I didn't know what I could afford to lose. When I reached the checkout, my hands felt cold. I watched as the cashier scanned each item, the total slowly adding up. I kept my eyes on the screen, afraid it might go over what I had. When she told me the amount, I handed over one of the bills, trying to act like this was normal. She looked at me for a moment, then at the items, then back at me. "Shopping alone?" she asked gently. My heart skipped. "My mom's waiting outside," I said quickly, the lie coming out before I even thought about it. She nodded, but her expression didn't fully change. I grabbed the bag and left as fast as I could, the cool air outside hitting my face again. The walk back felt different, heavier, but also more urgent. I was carrying food now, something that meant I could make it through another day. When I got home, I placed everything on the kitchen table and looked at it like it was something precious. I opened one pack of noodles, carefully dividing it into 2 portions. Half for now, half for later. I poured hot water over it and sat down, watching it soften. The smell filled the room, and for a moment it almost felt comforting. But when I started eating, I forced myself to go slowly. Every bite mattered. Every bite had to last. I stopped halfway through, even though I was still hungry, and set the rest aside for later. That became my routine. Half a pack in the morning, half at night. Bread in between if I needed it. Peanut butter sparingly, only when I felt too weak. It wasn't enough, but it was something I could control. The hunger didn't go away. It stayed with me, growing sharper each day. My stomach would ache sometimes so much that I had to sit down and wait for it to pass. But I told myself I was doing okay. I was managing. I was making it work. Because what other choice did I have? Each day blurred into the next, marked only by what I ate and what I saved. I stopped thinking in terms of time. I started thinking in terms of meals. How much I had left. How long I could stretch it. Survival wasn't about living anymore. It was about lasting. About getting through one more day, then one more after that. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, something inside me started to change. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was learning how to endure. Quietly, carefully, without anyone noticing. But even then, deep down, there was a truth I couldn't ignore. No matter how careful I was, No matter how much I tried to stretch what I had, this wasn't sustainable. And sooner or later, something would break. By the fifth day, something inside me started to change, in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't just the hunger anymore, though, that was still there, constant and draining. It was the feeling that I was disappearing, not physically, but in a way that felt harder to explain. Like I could scream, and no one would hear me. Like I could vanish, and nothing would really change. That morning, I woke up slower than usual. My body felt heavier, my movements delayed, like everything required more effort than it should. Even sitting up in bed made my head feel light for a moment, like the room tilted slightly before settling again. I pressed my hand against my stomach, hoping it would quiet the ache, but it didn't. It never did anymore. I went downstairs and prepared my usual half portion of instant noodles, watching the steam rise as I waited. The smell used to feel comforting. Now it just reminded me how little I had. I ate slowly, carefully, forcing myself to stretch every bite as long as possible. When I finished, the hunger didn't go away. It only softened enough for me to ignore it for a while. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space in front of me, and that's when the thought came back again. Call her. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe she would listen. Maybe she didn't understand how bad it was. I picked up my phone, hesitating for a few seconds before dialing. Each ring felt longer than the last. I almost hung up before she answered. Hello, her voice came through distant, distracted, like she wasn't really there. I could hear music in the background, laughter, the sound of dishes. Mom, I said, my voice small, the card doesn't work. I don't have enough food. There was a pause, just long enough for hope to exist. Then she sighed. Sydney, you're being dramatic again. Her words landed heavier than anything else I had felt all week. You have money. You can manage. It's not enough, I said quickly, the words rushing out now. I tried to use the card. It says it's not activated. Another pause, shorter this time. I'm at a restaurant, she said, her tone sharper now. I can't deal with this right now. Stop calling me. But Mom, click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, still holding it to my ear, like the conversation might somehow continue if I waited long enough. But it didn't. It was over. I slowly lowered my hand, placing the phone on the table. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to feel it. It wasn't just that she didn't help. It was that she didn't care to understand. I sat there for a long time, the silence pressing in around me, heavier than before. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I opened my mom's social media page. There it was, a new photo. She was standing in front of a famous landmark, smiling brightly, holding a glass in her hand. The caption talked about how perfect everything was, how grateful she felt, how beautiful life could be. People were commenting, praising her, admiring her. I stared at the screen, trying to connect that image to the reality I was living in. It didn't match, not even close. That was the moment something inside me stopped hoping. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to change how I saw things. If no one was going to see what was happening, then I had to make them see. I reached for the old tablet my mom had given me and turned on the camera. My hands were shaking slightly, but I held it steady. Today is day 5, I said, my voice uneven at first. I don't have enough food. The card doesn't work. I called my mom, and she told me I was being dramatic. I paused, swallowing hard, then continued. I'm not being dramatic. I'm just hungry. When I stopped recording, I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen. It didn't feel like much. Just a few words, a short video, but it felt important in a way I couldn't explain. Like I had done something real, something that couldn't be ignored if someone ever saw it. That was the beginning. Not of the end, not yet. But of something else. A quiet decision to stop pretending everything was okay, to stop waiting for someone else to fix it. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if anyone would ever see those videos. But for the first time since they left, I felt something different. Not hope exactly, but clarity. If no one was coming to help me, then I would make sure the truth existed somewhere, even if it was only in a recording, even if it was only for me. And if you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, like no one would listen, no matter how hard you tried, I want you to remember something. Your truth still matters, even if it's whispered at first. Sometimes the smallest step, like pressing record, can change everything. If this part of the story hit, you don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow to see what happens next. Because this is only the beginning. By the 7th day, I had learned how to move through the house quietly, how to keep everything looking normal, how to act like nothing was wrong, even when everything inside me felt like it was falling apart. Hunger had become part of my routine. The silence no longer shocked me. It just existed like something permanent. I told myself I was managing. I told myself I could get through this if I stayed careful, if I didn't make mistakes. But the truth is, you can only pretend for so long before something breaks through. That afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to decide whether I should eat the last piece of bread now or save it for later when I heard a knock at the door. It was soft at first, almost polite, like whoever was there didn't want to disturb me. My heart jumped immediately. No one ever came to our house without my mother knowing. I froze for a moment, not moving, hoping maybe they would go away. But the knock came again, slightly louder this time. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weaker than they should, and walked toward the door. Every step felt uncertain. I didn't know who it could be, and I didn't know what I was supposed to say. When I finally opened the door, I saw him, Mr. Harold, the elderly man who lived next door. He had always been kind in a quiet way, waving when he saw me, but we had never really talked. Now he was standing there looking at me more closely than anyone had in a long time. "Hey there, kiddo," he said, gently, his voice calm but careful. "I noticed your parents haven't been around for a few days. Everything okay?" The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that since my parents left. No one had looked at me like they were actually trying to see the answer. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out right away. "They're on a trip," I said finally, the sentence sounding rehearsed. Even to me, a business trip. He raised his eyebrows slightly, not in disbelief, but like he was thinking. "A business trip," he repeated. "And you're here by yourself?" I felt my chest tighten. This was the moment I had been trying to avoid. I could lie. I should lie. That was what I had been doing. That was what my mother expected. But something about the way he looked at me made it harder to pretend. My lips moved before I could stop them. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice trembled slightly. It wasn't convincing. Not even to me. Mr. Harold didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just studied my face, my posture, the way I was standing there, like I didn't know what to do with my hands. Then his expression softened. "Have you eaten today?" he asked quietly. The question hit me harder than I expected. It was so simple, but it went straight through every wall I had tried to build. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," I said, the lie automatic. He didn't call me out. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like he understood more than I was saying. "Well," he continued, his tone gentle, "I made too much dinner. Happens all the time. Would you like to come over? Hate to see it go to waste." I knew he was lying. People who lived alone didn't accidentally make too much food like that. But I also knew why he was saying it that way. He was giving me a way to accept help without feeling like I was asking for it, without feeling like I was doing something wrong. I looked at him for a moment, my mind racing. I thought about my mother's voice, telling me not to bother anyone. I thought about the fear that had been sitting in my chest all week, but I also thought about the hunger. And in the end, hunger was louder. "Okay," I said quietly. That evening I sat at Mr. Harold's kitchen table, staring at a plate of food that felt almost unreal. Real food, warm, enough to fill the space in my stomach that had been empty for days. I didn't wait long before I started eating. At first I tried to go slowly to be polite, but that didn't last. Hunger took over, and I found myself eating faster than I meant to, barely tasting anything. Mr. Harold didn't interrupt. He didn't comment. He just sat across from me, watching with an expression that wasn't judgmental, just concerned. When I finished, I realized how much I had eaten, and a small wave of embarrassment hit me. I looked down at my plate, not sure what to say. But he didn't make it awkward. "You can come by any time," he said simply. That was it. No questions, no pressure, just an offer. And somehow that made it easier to breathe. After dinner, we sat for a while in the quiet. It wasn't the same kind of silence as my house. This one felt different. Softer. Safer. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. "Where are your parents really?" This time I didn't answer right away. I stared at my hands, thin, a little shaky, and for a moment I considered lying again. But something had already changed. Someone had seen me. Really seen me. And once that happens, it's harder to go back to pretending. So I told him, not everything at once, not in perfect order, but enough. Europe, a month, the money, the card that didn't work, the hunger. When I finished, the room felt quieter than before. Mr. Harold sat there for a long moment processing what I had said. Then he nodded slowly. All right, he said. We're going to figure this out. And for the first time since my parents left, I didn't feel completely alone. After that night at Mr. Harold's house, something inside me shifted in a way that felt small at first, but quickly grew into something stronger. It wasn't hope exactly, and it wasn't relief. It was something closer to awareness. For the first time, I understood that what was happening to me wasn't normal, and more importantly, it wasn't invisible, not anymore. Someone had seen me. Someone had asked questions, and that changed everything. But at the same time, a new fear began to grow alongside that realization. What if no one else believed me? What if it all disappeared? The moment I tried to explain it, what if my mother came back and turned everything into something else? Something that made me look like the problem. That thought stayed with me longer than anything else, because deep down I knew how easily the truth could be twisted. I had seen it before in small ways, how my mother could smile in front of people, how she could change the story with just a few words, how everyone always believed her. So that night, when I sat alone in my room again, holding the old tablet in my hands, I didn't pick it up because I felt strong. I picked it up because I felt like I was running out of time. I turned on the camera, slowly watching my own reflection appear on the screen. For a moment, I almost stopped. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to begin. Everything felt too big, too complicated to fit into words. But then I remembered the empty refrigerator, the hunger, the phone call, and suddenly the words came. Today is day 6, I said, my voice quiet but steady enough. I have half a loaf of bread left and a few packs of noodles. I'm trying to make it last. I turned the camera toward the kitchen, walking slowly as I recorded. I opened the refrigerator door, letting the light spill out over the nearly empty shelves. This is all I have, I said. The image felt almost surreal, like I was documenting someone else's life instead of my own. But I kept going. I showed the table the money that was left, the small portions I had divided. Then I turned the camera back toward myself. My parents are in Europe, I said. They left me here alone. The words felt heavier out loud, more real than they had in my thoughts. I paused for a moment, swallowing the tightness in my throat, then continued. The card they gave me doesn't work. I tried to call. She said I was being dramatic. I didn't cry. Not in that moment. My face stayed still, my voice controlled. It wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about truth. When I stopped recording, I sat there staring at the screen, replaying the video once. It didn't look dramatic. It didn't look exaggerated. It just looked real. And that was enough. The next morning, I did it again. This time, it felt slightly easier. I didn't hesitate as long before pressing record. Today is day 7, I said. I had half a pack of noodles this morning. I'm saving the rest for later. I showed the same things again, the refrigerator, the food, the empty spaces. It became a pattern, a routine. Every day I recorded something. Sometimes it was the food. Sometimes it was my weight on the scale. Sometimes it was just me sitting there talking about how I felt. Not everything came out clearly. Some days I didn't have the energy to say much. But I recorded anyway, because each video felt like a piece of something larger. Like I was building something that couldn't be ignored. I started writing things down too, in a notebook I found in my room. Dates. What I ate. How I felt. It didn't feel like something a child should have to do. It felt like evidence. And that word evidence stayed in my mind longer than I expected. I didn't fully understand it yet, but I knew it mattered. It meant that what I was going through wasn't just a feeling. It was something that could be shown, proven, understood by someone else. By the end of that week, recording had become part of my survival, just like rationing food or counting money. It gave me a sense of control in a situation where I had almost none. It made me feel like I wasn't completely powerless. Because even if no one came to help me right away, even if everything stayed the same for now, the truth was there. It existed. It was real. And it couldn't be erased. I didn't know who would see those videos. I didn't know when or how things would change. But for the first time since my parents left, I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was doing something, even if it was small, even if it was quiet. And sometimes that's where change begins. Not in big dramatic moments, but in the decision to stop pretending and start telling the truth, even if no one is listening yet. By the second week, the days had started to blur together, each one marked by the same routine of rationing food, recording evidence, and trying to act normal enough that no one would ask too many questions. But no matter how careful I was, my body couldn't hide the truth. Forever. Hunger doesn't stay invisible. It shows in the way you move, the way you think, the way you look at the world. When summer school started, I told myself it might actually help. It would give me somewhere to go, somewhere that felt structured and predictable, somewhere I didn't have to sit alone in the silence of the house all day. But I didn't realize how hard it would be to pretend everything was okay when I was standing in front of people who were trained to notice when something wasn't right. The first morning, I got ready by myself like I always did, but everything felt off. My clothes were wrinkled because I didn't really know how to use the washing machine properly. My hair was tangled because there was no one to help me brush it the way my mom used to when she felt like it. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to fix what I could, but it wasn't enough. I didn't look like the version of me people were used to seeing. When I walked into the classroom, I could feel the difference immediately. The room wasn't loud, but it wasn't silent either. There were voices, movement, life, things I hadn't been around much in the past days. My teacher, Mrs. Patterson, looked up as I entered. Her eyes stayed on me a second longer than normal. "Sydney," she said gently, "are you feeling all right?" The question made my chest tighten. I nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." It was automatic. It was always automatic. She didn't push, but I could feel her watching me throughout the class, like she was trying to understand something she couldn't quite see yet. I tried to focus on the lesson, but it was hard. My mind felt slower, like it couldn't keep up the way it used to. Numbers blurred on the board, words slipped away before I could fully process them. By the third day, it got worse. I remember sitting in math class staring at the board when suddenly everything started to spin. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a slight shift like the room tilted. Then it got stronger. My vision blurred, my ears filled with a dull ringing sound, and I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to stay steady. "Sydney." I heard my name, distant, like it was coming from far away. I tried to answer, but the words didn't come out. The next thing I knew, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a bed in the nurse's office. The light above me felt too bright, and for a moment I didn't remember how I got there. Then it all came rushing back. The classroom, the dizziness, the fall. The school nurse was standing nearby watching me closely. "You're awake," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" I pushed myself up slowly, my head still light. "I'm okay," I said, even though I wasn't. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she asked a different question. "Did you eat breakfast this morning?" The question hit me the same way it had when Mr. Harold asked it. Simple, direct, impossible to answer honestly without revealing everything. "Yes," I said. Another lie. She studied my face for a moment, then motioned for me to step onto a scale. I did as she asked, my movements slow. When she looked at the number, her expression changed. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Concern. Real concern. "You've lost a noticeable amount of weight," she said carefully. "Where are your parents?" The question lingered in the air. I didn't answer right away. My hands rested in my lap, fingers twisting together slightly. "They're traveling," I said finally. For a while, the nurse exchanged a look with Mrs. Patterson, who had entered quietly without me noticing. There was something unspoken in that glance. Something that made my stomach tighten again. Not from hunger this time, but from fear. Mrs. Patterson stepped closer and sat beside me. Her voice was softer now, but more serious. "Sydney," she said, "you don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need you to understand something. I can't ignore what I'm seeing." I looked down at my hands, not knowing what to say. For so long, I had been trying to make everything invisible, trying to keep it contained. But now it was slipping out, piece by piece, and I couldn't stop it. That afternoon, I returned home, the house just as quiet as before, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Something had shifted. The outside world had started to notice. And that meant things were changing whether I was ready or not. That night, my phone rang. An international number. I knew who it was before I answered. "Hello," I said carefully. "Sydney," my mother's voice came through sharp, controlled. "I got a call from your school. What did you tell them?" My heart started beating faster. "Nothing," I said quickly. "I didn't say anything." "Good," she replied immediately, but there was tension in her voice. "Because if you start telling people stories, if you embarrass me, there will be consequences." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I'm not telling stories," I said quietly. "I just stopped." She cut me off. "You're being dramatic again. You have food. You have money. You have everything you need." I tightened my grip on the phone. "It's not enough." There was a pause, then her voice dropped lower, colder. "Listen to me carefully. If you tell anyone anything, I will send you away. Boarding school. You won't come back here. Do you understand?" I froze. The words settled heavily in my chest. This wasn't just dismissal anymore. It was a threat. "Yes," I whispered. "Good," she said. "Don't call again." The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still in my hand. The fear was back, stronger than before. But it wasn't the same kind of fear. It wasn't just about being alone anymore. It was about what would happen if I wasn't silent. After that phone call, something inside me changed again. But this time it wasn't quiet or uncertain. It felt sharper, clearer, like a line had been drawn that I could no longer step back from. My mother's voice stayed in my head long after the call ended, repeating the same words. "Don't tell anyone. Don't embarrass me, or you'll be sent away." For a moment, fear tried to take over. It told me to stay quiet, to go back to pretending to make everything look normal again. But something else pushed back, something stronger than before. Because now I knew the truth wasn't just mine anymore. The school had seen it. The nurse had seen it. Mrs. Patterson had seen it. And once the truth is seen, it doesn't disappear. Just because someone tells you to hide it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the tablet in front of me, staring at my reflection on the dark screen, before turning the camera on again. My hands weren't shaking this time. My voice didn't tremble the way it had before. "Today is day 10, I said. Steady and clear. My mom called me. She told me if I say anything, she'll send me away." I paused for a moment, letting the words settle. Saying them out loud made them feel heavier, more real. "I'm not lying," I continued. "I'm just saying what's happening." I turned the camera toward the refrigerator, again opening the door slowly. The light revealed the same emptiness, less food than before, fewer options, less time. "I don't have enough food," I said. "I'm trying to make it last." When I stopped recording, I didn't feel relief. I felt something closer to resolve. Like I had crossed a point where going back wasn't possible anymore. The next morning, things moved faster than I expected. At school, I could feel the difference before anything was said. Teachers looked at me longer. Conversations stopped when I walked by. It wasn't obvious, but it was there, attention quiet, but focused. By the middle of the day, I was called to the office. My heart started beating faster the moment I heard my name. This was it. This was what my mother had warned me about. I followed the staff member down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. When we reached the office, I saw the principal sitting behind the desk, Mrs. Patterson standing nearby, and the nurse beside her. All three of them looked at me the same way, carefully, seriously, like they were trying to handle something important. "Sydney," the principal said gently, "we need to talk to you." I nodded, my hands tightening slightly at my sides. "We've been trying to reach your parents," she continued. "We haven't been able to get a response." I didn't say anything. I already knew why. "We're concerned about you," Mrs. Patterson added softly. "Your health, your situation at home." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. This was the moment where everything could change. I could lie again. I could repeat the same story, keep everything hidden, protect the version of reality my mother wanted. Or I could tell the truth. But telling the truth meant consequences. It meant losing whatever fragile connection I still had to my parents. It meant stepping into something unknown. I looked down at my hands, then back up at them. And for the first time, I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit there, stretching between us. "There's no one at home," I said finally. The words came out quieter than I expected, but they didn't break. "My parents are gone. They left me." No one interrupted. No one reacted immediately. They just listened. "They said I could take care of myself," I continued. "They gave me money, but it's not enough. The card doesn't work." My voice stayed steady, even as the truth unfolded. piece by piece. When I finished, the room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not empty, not ignoring. This one was full of understanding, of concern, of something that felt like action waiting to happen. The principal nodded, slowly exchanging a glance with the others. "Thank you for telling us," she said gently. "You did the right thing." Those words felt strange, almost unfamiliar. The right thing. I wasn't used to hearing that about something that felt so risky. That afternoon I went home, but I didn't feel the same as before. The house was still quiet. The refrigerator was still nearly empty. Nothing physical had changed. But something had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. The truth was no longer contained. It was out there now, moving through people who had the power to do something about it. That night, I recorded again. "Today is day 11, I said, looking directly into the camera. "I told the truth today. At school." I paused, then added quietly, "I don't know what's going to happen next." And that was the truth. I didn't know what would come next. But for the first time, I wasn't just surviving in silence anymore. I had been heard. After I told the truth at school, I expected something to change immediately. I thought someone would come right away, that something visible would happen, that would make everything feel different. But the truth is, change doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it moves quietly behind the scenes, building in ways you can't see yet. The next day felt almost the same on the surface. I woke up in the same quiet house, walked into the same kitchen, opened the same nearly empty refrigerator. The routine hadn't changed, but I had. There was a new awareness sitting in my chest, something that made everything feel sharper, more real. At school, the atmosphere was different, even if no one said it out loud. I could feel it in the way teachers looked at me, in the way conversations shifted when I entered a room. It wasn't obvious, but it was their attention, concern, something moving beneath the surface. By the afternoon, I was called into the office again. This time, it felt different before I even stepped inside. When I walked in, I saw the principal, Mrs. Patterson, and the nurse again, but there was someone else there too, a woman I didn't recognize. She stood slightly apart, observing quietly, her expression calm but focused. "Sydney," the principal said gently, "this is someone who wants to make sure you're safe." The woman stepped forward slightly and smiled, not in a forced way, but in a way that felt careful. "Hi, Sydney. My name is Karen. I work with Child Services." The words landed slowly. Child Services. I had heard that phrase before, but never in a way that felt connected to me. Now it was real. I nodded, not sure what to say. Karen didn't rush. She didn't ask too many questions right away. Instead, she spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I know this might feel overwhelming," she said, "but you're not in trouble. We're here to help you." Help. The word felt unfamiliar in this context. I had spent so long thinking in terms of survival that help felt like something distant, something that didn't apply to me. Karen asked me simple questions at first. Who was at home? What I had been eating? When my parents left, I answered quietly, repeating what I had already said, but this time, it felt different. More official. More final. Like each word carried weight beyond just being heard. At one point she asked, "Do you feel safe staying at home right now?" I hesitated. It wasn't a question I had asked myself directly before. Safe. I had been thinking about hunger, about being alone, about getting through each day. But safety was something deeper. I thought about the empty house, the silence, the fear that had settled into every corner. I thought about my mother's voice, the warning, the threat, and then I answered honestly. "No," I said. The word felt small, but it changed everything. Karen nodded, not surprised, not alarmed, just understanding. "Okay," she said softly. "Thank you for telling me." The meeting didn't last forever, but it felt like a turning point. When I left the office, nothing around me looked different, but I knew something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. That evening I went home again, the house still quiet, still empty. But this time it didn't feel like the only place I existed. There were people outside of it now, people who knew people who were involved. I didn't know exactly what they were doing or how long it would take, but I knew it had started. Later that night, my phone rang again, the same international number. My stomach tightened before I even answered. "Sydney," my mother's voice came through, immediately sharp and controlled. "What did you tell them?" There was no greeting, no softness, just accusation. "I told the truth," I said quietly. There was a pause, then her voice dropped lower, colder than before. Do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't answer. You're embarrassing me, she continued. You're making this family look like something it's not. The words felt distant, like they belonged to a different reality than the one I was living in. I'm not lying, I said. My voice was steadier now than it had been before. I didn't say you were lying, she replied quickly, then added, but you didn't have to say anything at all. That was the moment I understood something clearly. To her, the problem wasn't what had happened. The problem was that I had said it out loud. Listen to me, she continued, her tone sharpening again. You're going to fix this. When we get back, you'll tell them you exaggerated. You'll say you misunderstood. Do you understand? I stood there in silence, the phone pressed against my ear, my heart beating steadily now, instead of racing. Something inside me had already decided. No, I said. The word came out before I could second guess it. There was a long pause on the other end. What did you say? I said no. I repeated, my voice calm, almost unfamiliar to me. I'm not going to lie. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything she had said. And for the first time, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing. The days after that call felt different in a way I couldn't fully explain. It was as if something had been set into motion. Something larger than me. Something that didn't need my permission to keep going. I was no longer just surviving inside the walls of my house. What had been hidden was now moving outward, carried by people who had the authority to act. At school, everything felt sharper. Teachers didn't just glance at me anymore, they watched. Not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that made it clear they were paying attention now. Every small detail mattered, every sign of weakness, every moment I looked tired or distracted seemed to confirm something they were already beginning to understand. By the middle of that week, I was called into the office again. This time, Karen was there waiting. She greeted me the same way as before, calm, steady, not rushing anything, but I could tell something had changed. There was a seriousness in her posture, a quiet certainty that hadn't been there before. Sydney, she said gently, we're going to take a closer look at your situation. I nodded, even though I didn't fully understand what that meant yet. Karen didn't overwhelm me with information. She asked me to walk her through everything again from the beginning. When my parents left, what they gave me, what I had been eating,